Urgent, Vikings fan! Look at what just happened. Nobody saw this coming, huh? But first, make sure to subscribe to the channel because we bring you daily videos with the latest your team news, and don't forget to turn on notifications so you don't miss anything. With draft approaching, Vikings plan at backup QB remains unclear. Kevin O'Connell and company should get the benefit of the doubt when it comes to quarterbacks, but their plan is anyone's guess at this point. When it comes to quarterbacks, Kevin O'Connell and the Vikings deserve the benefit of the doubt. They've earned that over the last 3 years. They undoubtedly have a plan for adding a backup quarterback to a room that currently features only J.J. McCarthy and Brett Rypien. It's just that the specifics of that plan are anyone's guess at this point. It's now been 5 weeks since NFL free agency began. The draft is quickly approaching, and the Vikings have patiently waited as all kinds of backup quarterbacks have signed elsewhere. The two latest options to come off the board this past weekend were Joe Flacco Browns and Drew Lock Seahawks. According to KSTP's Darren Wolfson, the Vikings weren't in on either player. They were not in on Drew Lock, they were not in on Joe Flacco, Wolfson said on Score North. In fact, Joe Flacco's representation was trying to get Joe here. He thought it was a very logical fit. He loved the idea, Joe's representation, of Joe being here. But the Vikings never took the bait. The Vikings never made an offer in the end. Flacco wound up getting a 1-year, $4 million deal from Cleveland that could be worth up to $13 million with incentives, according to reports. So what is the Vikings' plan? We know they're waiting until after the draft to sign any other free agents of note so that they don't mess with the 2026 compensatory pick formula. Carson Wentz is still out there, and he could make sense after spending the last 2 seasons as a backup for the Chiefs and Rams. Ryan Tannehill, who shares an agent with McCarthy, is the other free agent QB of note, aside from Aaron Rodgers, who we know isn't viewed as an option for Minnesota. Maybe it won't be a free agent. There's been buzz from folks like Wolfson and The Athletic's Alec Lewis that a trade for a quarterback could be a possibility. 2 names that have been floated are Sam Howell and Aiden O'Connell. Howell, the former Washington starter, is now the likely QB3 in Seattle due to Lock's arrival, so he could be available. Perhaps the Vikings will at some point ship out a later-round 2026 draft pick to bring in a quarterback of their choosing. The idea of a potential reunion with Kirk Cousins, if he's released or traded by the Falcons, is another one that's come up, but there are several factors that would seemingly make that unlikely. The other possibility is that the Vikings are higher on Rypien than anyone thinks. Maybe they're comfortable with him as their veteran backup and are considering drafting a day 3 QB as their addition to the room. That seems less likely. Can a team in winnow mode really have Rypien or a rookie as the backup to an unproven McCarthy, but also can't be ruled out? For now, the plan remains unclear. All we can do is wait and see which course of action O'Connell and company end up taking. Whenever they do, eventually make their move. Pausing this news, just to say that if you want YouTube to keep recommending the latest Vikes news to you, it's very important that you leave a like on this video. Thanks. Now let's get back to the news. New report reveals Aaron Rodgers' pitch to Vikings. The ever-evolving saga of Aaron Rodgers and the Minnesota Vikings continues to have more intriguing insights. Minnesota had a tough decision to make this offseason regarding its quarterback position. It was between their young first-round pick, J.J. McCarthy, Sam Darnold, and Aaron Rodgers. Darnold decided to pack his bags and head to the Pacific Northwest to sign with the Seattle Seahawks. After conversations with Rodgers, the Vikings sided with McCarthy as the starter in 2025. What led to that decision is becoming clearer with each new report. Sports Illustrated's Albert Breer shared more about what was going on behind the scenes with the Vikings' decisions at quarterback. The conversation first started with 2 quarterbacks who were set to be free agents, Darnold and Daniel Jones. They wanted to respect the year Darnold had and discussed a run-it-back scenario with the 28-year-old, Breer said. Darnold found another team in Seattle willing to give him the chance to be a multi-year answer, so the Vikings made a strong offer to Jones, who joined the team in November. They pitched him on competing with tools around him to revive his career, but Jones preferred a fresh start without the Darnold comp hanging over him, and perhaps a better shot to start with the Indianapolis Colts. This opened the door to where Rodgers would come into the picture. Breer depicts the pitch Rodgers made to the Vikings to join the team for 2025, which is where Rodgers entered the equation. When the four-time MVP reached out to the Vikings with the idea of making a one-year run at a Lombardi and tying it to being a willing mentor for McCarthy, the team felt it had to listen. The proposition, of course, was different than the other two. They'd be jamming the pause button on the idea of playing McCarthy rather than generating competition and multiple quarterback options. The 41-year-old quarterback is coming off a rough season with the New York Jets, which went 512. Rodgers completed just 63 of his passes for 3,197 yards and 28 touchdowns to 11 interceptions. Minnesota's active roster only includes McCarthy and Brett Rypien as quarterbacks. The Vikings will decide who else to bring in as the third quarterback by April 28th. While Rodgers is linked to the Pittsburgh Steelers in free agency rumors, the Vikings will most likely stay in the conversation until Rodgers makes his decision. Minnesota seems solid on starting the future now with McCarthy as the starter. Vikings showing interest in reuniting J.J. McCarthy. With familiar face, the Minnesota Vikings passed on the option of signing future Hall of Fame quarterback Aaron Rodgers earlier this offseason. That decision signaled their full belief in young quarterback and former Michigan Wolverines star J.J. McCarthy. McCarthy was drafted with the number 10 overall pick in the 2024 NFL Draft. It was clear when he was drafted that the Vikings viewed him as their long-term future under center. Now, Minnesota will need to surrounding McCarthy with as much talent as possible ahead of his first year as the starting quarterback. With that in mind, the Vikings are showing interest in reuniting McCarthy with a very familiar face from his days at Michigan, according to a report from Ian Rappaport, as shared by the Wolverine. Minnesota is hosting Michigan running back Kalel Mullings on a top 30 visit. Mullings would be a great fit for the Vikings behind veteran starter Aaron Jones. He could make an immediate impact and help keep Jones fresh and healthy throughout the season. During the 2024 college football season with the Wolverines, Mullings put up good production. He carried the football 185 times for 948 yards and 12 touchdowns, averaging a solid 1 yards per carry. He only caught 6 passes for 35 yards on the year. Bringing in pieces to help McCarthy feel more comfortable would be wise. Minnesota targeting one of his former college teammates could help that cause, while Mullings would not be a first-round pick or anything close to it. He could be a piece that the Vikings target in the 5th or 6th round. Vikings 2025 opponents below. You can find which teams the Minnesota Vikings will play during the 2025 NFL regular season. The dates and times of the 2025 NFL schedule will be announced in the spring. Home Chicago Bears, Detroit Lions, Green Bay Packers. Philadelphia Eagles, Washington Commanders. Baltimore Ravens, Cincinnati. Bengals, Atlanta. Falcons, Atlanta was decided by the Falcons and Vikings, finishing second in their divisions. Away, Chicago Bears, Detroit. Lions, Green Bay, Packers, Dallas Cowboys, New York Giants, Pittsburgh Steelers, Cleveland Browns, Seattle Seahawks, Los Angeles Chargers. Seattle and L.A. were determined by order of finish in divisions. Aaron Rodgers risked Packers' legacy with embarrassing plea to Vikings. Aaron Rodgers reportedly had all sorts of plans to hurt the Packers. To the surprise of absolutely nobody, former Green Bay Packers quarterback Aaron Rodgers has been the center of all sorts of drama during this NFL offseason. With his 2-year run with the New York Jets coming to an end, make that his 1-year and 4-play run, the 4-time NFL MVP seemingly had several options at his disposal as it pertains to finding a new team. Retirement is clearly still an option as well, but put that aside for now. Nobody ever really thought Rodgers would sign with the Cleveland Browns or Tennessee Titans, but both were apparently available to him. The New York Giants were a popular choice among pundits, but that went out the window when they signed both Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston. Then you've got the Pittsburgh Steelers, who let both Wilson and Justin Fields walk out the door in free agency and are seemingly putting all their eggs in the Rodgers basket. Now, the New Orleans Saints may be in play given the injury news surrounding Derek Carr. And then, of course, we come to the Minnesota Vikings, who most believe were Rodgers' preferred destination, as he apparently and hilariously wanted to just go ahead and complete the Brett Favre career path. Favre, of course, was traded to the Jets in 2008 when the Packers were ready to hand the reins to Rodgers, just as Rodgers was dealt to New York 2 years ago when Green Bay was ready to give the ball to Jordan Love. And after one season with Gang Green, the 3-time MVP signed with the Vikings. which damaged his relationship with Green Bay for years. One has to assume Rodgers signing in Minnesota would do the same, especially if the reported plea he made is valid. Aaron Rodgers reportedly wanted 1 year to help the Vikings win a Super Bowl and mentor J.J. McCarthy. The Vikings had a big decision to make this offseason regarding the quarterback position. Around this time a year ago, they'd already signed Sam Darnold to a 1-year, $10 million deal, but then selected J.J. McCarthy with the 10th overall pick in the draft, clearly seeing the latter as the future of the franchise. McCarthy, of course, went down with a season-ending injury in the preseason, thus giving Darnold a chance to shine, which he undoubtedly did, as he had the best season of his career while leading Minnesota to a 143 regular season record. There were reportedly discussions about bringing Darnold back, but he ultimately signed with the Seattle Seahawks. The Vikings also thought about resigning Daniel Jones, who they'd acquired late last season after he was released by the Giants, but he chose to ink a deal with the Indianapolis Colts, perhaps because he feels he has a better shot at taking Anthony Richardson's job than he does taking McCarthy's. And make no mistake, the Vikings are moving forward with McCarthy, which is why Aaron Rodgers isn't wearing purple and yellow right now. But according to Sports Illustrated's Albert Breer, the 10-time Pro Bowler did everything he could in an attempt to make that happen. When the 4-time MVP reached out to the Vikings with the idea of making a 1-year run at a Lombardi and tying it to being a willing mentor for McCarthy, the team felt it had to listen, Breer wrote. The proposition, of course, was different. Than the other two, they'd be jamming the pause button on the idea of playing McCarthy, rather than generating competition and multiple quarterback options. In the end, faced with all that, the Vikings found themselves emboldened to give McCarthy the runway to seize the job, the staff the opportunity to build the offense for him, and see how that looked at the end of the spring. So the Vikings passed on Rodgers, pushing their chips in on a 22-year-old. Packers fans can't be pleased with hearing all that, nor can the organization itself. Look, from purely a football standpoint, it makes sense for Rodgers. I mean, what quarterback wouldn't want to sign up to throw passes to Justin Jefferson? And even beyond Jefferson, the Vikings certainly have enough talent on both sides of the ball to make another strong run at both the NFC North and the number 1 seed in the NFC. But Rodgers, like Favre all those years ago, clearly doesn't care what this would have meant for the Packers. Nor did he seem to care that, like Favre, he would have immediately become a villain in Green Bay, which he really isn't right now. Sure, some are still upset with how his tenure ended, but one has to think he could easily go the route of signing a 1-day contract with Green Bay and retire a Packer tomorrow if he wanted to. But had he signed with the Vikings, one has to assume that it would take years for him to be welcomed back as a franchise hero, just as it took Favre several years to get back in the good graces of the organization. Favre is a villain to a lot of people these days for far different reasons, but we're not going to get into that. With Rodgers, it wouldn't have only been him playing against the Packers as a Viking, it would have also been the fact that he was willing to mentor McCarthy. None of this really matters now as the Vikings have moved on, but if this is how things actually went down, maybe Rodgers will still be seen by some as a villain after all. And now, Vikings fan, I want to hear from you. What's your opinion on this? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I don't know if you know this, but your opinion matters a lot for Vikes. He'll be back any moment with more Vikings news. Skol, Vikings!